My name is Harold. I am 67 years old. I have worked with my hands my entire life, built furniture, fixed fences, repaired rooftops in the freezing cold. My palms are rough like tree bark. My back bends a little when I walk now. My knees ache on cold mornings. But I have never, not once in 67 years, felt pain like I felt on that mountain. Not the physical pain. The other kind, the kind that doesn't bleed on the outside. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened on the Clearwater Mountain Trail on the 14th of October. I'm going to tell you every detail because I need you to understand, not just what my son and his wife did to us that day, but why they did it, and what my wife knew, had always known, that she never told me, that secret, that terrible, earth-shaking secret. It changed everything. Let me take you back, not to that mountain. Not yet. Let me take you back to where this story really begins, to a small house with a green front door on Maplewood Lane. That was our home, mine and my wife Margaret's. We bought that house 38 years ago with money I saved from 6 years of carpentry work. We painted every wall ourselves. We planted roses in the front yard, Margaret's roses, pink ones. She loved those roses more than she loved most people. She used to joke. We had one son. His name is Daniel. Daniel was our whole world, our only child. We had tried for more children, but God gave us just the one, and we poured every drop of love we had into that boy. New shoes every school year, even when money was tight. Piano lessons. A used but clean bicycle for his 12th birthday that I spent 3 weekends restoring in the garage. Daniel was a smart boy, a quiet boy. He got a scholarship to a good university 4 hours away. The day we dropped him off, Margaret cried the entire drive home. I didn't cry. I just kept both hands on the steering wheel and stared at the road. But my chest felt like someone had hollowed it out with a spoon. We were so proud of him. That pride, I think, was our first mistake, because proud parents sometimes forget to also teach their children what it means to be humble. Daniel graduated, got a good job at an engineering firm in the city, made good money, bought a nice apartment, and then 3 years into his career, he met Vivienne. Vivienne was beautiful. I'll say that plainly and without bitterness. She had sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, and she wore expensive clothes, and she spoke very fast, like every sentence was competing to be somewhere else. She came from a wealthy family. Her father owned several businesses in the city. She was used to a certain kind of life. When Daniel brought her home for the first time, she looked at our house, our little house with the green door and Margaret's roses, and she smiled the kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. "Oh," she said, "how quaint." Margaret looked at me. I looked at my shoes. That was the beginning. They got married 18 months later. Big wedding. Vivienne's family paid for most of it, which meant Vivienne's family made most of the decisions. Margaret and I sat at a table near the back, near the kitchen, actually. I could hear the servers moving behind us all evening. I didn't say anything. Daniel had changed by this point. Not all at once. That's never how it happens. It was gradual, like how a photograph fades in the sun. You don't notice it day by day, but then one morning you look at it and realize the colors aren't what they used to be. He stopped calling on Sundays. He stopped asking about the garden, about the neighbors, about my woodworking. When they visited, which became less and less often, Vivienne would walk through our home with her arms slightly away from her sides, like she was afraid to touch anything. She would decline Margaret's cooking. We ate on the way. She would say, every single time, and Daniel would just nod and say nothing. Margaret kept cooking anyway. Every visit, she would spend the whole morning making Daniel's favorites: roast chicken, potato soup, her apple cake with the brown sugar crust that used to make him close his eyes and say, "Mom, this is the best thing in the world." He stopped saying that. One evening, during a visit, Vivienne answered a phone call in our living room. She spoke loudly, laughed loudly, and then, without looking at either of us, said to Daniel, "Can we leave? I can't hear in here. The walls are too thin in these old houses." Our house. The house his father built a bookshelf for every single room. The house his mother scrubbed on her hands and knees every Saturday morning. Too thin. Daniel stood up. "We should get going, Dad," he said. He didn't look at me when he said it. I walked them to the door. I watched them get into their big silver car. I stood on the porch until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table, where Margaret was quietly wrapping up the untouched apple cake. "It's fine," she said before I could speak. "I know," I said. We both knew it wasn't. The trip to Clearwater Mountain was Daniel's idea. At least, that's what he told us. It was early September when he called. First call in almost 2 months. He sounded cheerful on the phone, the old Daniel, almost warm. My heart lifted like a window being opened. "Dad," he said, "Vivienne and I want to take you and Mom on a hiking trip. Clearwater Mountain. It's beautiful in October. The leaves are changing. The air is clean. You'd love it. What do you say?" I covered the phone with my hand and told Margaret. Her face, you should have seen her face. It lit up. 62 years old, gray hair pinned back, apron still on from baking, and she looked like a young girl for a moment. "Tell him yes," she whispered. "Tell him yes right now before he changes his mind." I laughed, actually laughed for the first time in a while. "We'd love that, son," I said into the phone. There were things I noticed and ignored in the weeks that followed. Small things. Vivienne had suggested the specific trail, the Ridgeback Path, which went along the edge of the mountain. A longer trail, more secluded. I had looked it up online and felt a tiny flicker of unease. It was noted as for experienced hikers only. But Daniel said they'd walked it before, and it was perfectly safe for older people if you went slowly. I trusted my son, 40 years of raising him, 40 years of loving him. I trusted my son. We met them at the base of the trail at 8 in the morning. Daniel had driven up the night before with Vivienne, and they'd stayed in a hotel in town. They looked rested, dressed for the hike, new gear, good boots. Vivienne had her hair in a perfect ponytail. She smiled when she saw us, a real enough smile that I felt my guard lower. "Harold, Margaret, ready for an adventure," she said. Margaret hugged Daniel for a long time. He patted her back twice, the way you pat the back of an acquaintance, and then stepped away. We started up the trail. The morning was beautiful. I won't take that away from it. The leaves were red and gold, and the air smelled like cold pine and earth. Margaret walked beside me, her hand in mine, and she kept pointing at things. A red leaf, a far-off hawk, a little stream we crossed on a wooden bridge. "This was a good idea," she said quietly to me. It was. I agreed. For the first 2 hours, it was genuinely pleasant. We stopped for water. We ate the sandwiches Margaret had packed. Daniel told a story about a work project that made us all laugh. Vivienne even asked Margaret about her roses. I thought, maybe things are changing. Maybe this is the turn. Then we reached the Ridgeback section of the trail. The path narrowed. The ground to our left fell away sharply, not immediately to a cliff, but sloping steeply down through rocks and thin trees before reaching a sheer drop about 40 feet below. A wooden railing ran along parts of it, but not all. There were gaps. "Should we be careful here?" Margaret asked. "It's fine," Vivienne said quickly. "We've walked it a dozen times. Just stay on the path." We continued. Vivienne and Daniel moved slightly ahead. I noticed, and again, I chose not to notice, that they had moved ahead deliberately, positioned themselves forward. I noticed that Vivienne kept glancing back at us. I thought she was being considerate, checking our pace. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. We reached one of the gaps in the railing, a section about 8 feet wide where there was nothing between the path and the steep, rocky slope. Daniel and Vivienne had stopped just ahead of it, facing us. I remember thinking they'd stop to wait for us, to help us across the gap, maybe. To be careful, Margaret was slightly ahead of me just by a step. I remember Daniel's face. I have replayed it 10,000 times. He looked calm. That's what I can't forget. He looked perfectly, completely calm. Vivienne said something I didn't quite hear. Then she moved toward Margaret, and she pushed her, not accidentally, not a stumble. She pushed her. Both hands, hard. Margaret made a sound, not quite a scream, more like a sharp intake of breath, the sound of complete shock, and she fell sideways, off the path, and tumbled down the rocky slope. I had 1 second to understand what was happening. I turned to Daniel, my son, my boy, and he pushed me too. I don't remember the fall itself. I remember the sky spinning. I remember hitting something, a rock, a tree root on the way down. I remember a terrible pain in my left side. I remember the sound of my own body landing, and then stillness. I was lying on my back on the rocky ground, 40 feet below the path. My left arm was underneath me at a wrong angle. My head was bleeding. I could feel warmth running down the side of my face. My ribs screamed with every breath. For a moment I thought, this is it. This is how it ends, but then I heard her, Margaret, Harold. Her voice was barely a sound. A breath, a ghost of a word. She was about 6 feet from me, half, hidden by a large rock. Her face was cut. Her hands were bleeding. She looked like she'd been broken and put back together badly. But her eyes were clear. Her eyes were sharp. Harold, she said again, barely moving her lips, listen to me. I opened my mouth. Don't speak, she said, don't speak. I looked up. Above us, at the rim of the slope, I could just make out 2 shapes. Daniel and Vivienne, standing at the gap in the railing, looking down. Pretend to be dead. Margaret whispered, don't move, don't make a sound, please. I didn't understand. My brain was fogged with pain and shock. But Margaret's eyes held something in them that I had never seen in 60 years of knowing her. Not fear exactly. Certainty, like she had known this was coming, like she had been waiting for it. I went still. I closed my eyes halfway. I let my body go slack. Above us, I heard Vivienne's voice, carried down on the wind. Are they moving? A pause. Daniel's voice, I don't think so. Another pause. Good. Vivienne's voice, flat, businesslike. Come on. We need to get back to the car before anyone comes up the trail. Footsteps. Retreating silence. I lay there, bleeding, broken, barely breathing, and I waited until I couldn't hear anything at all except wind and birdsong. Then I turned my head toward my wife. Margaret, I said, what is happening? And she told me. Lying there on that cold mountain ground, with blood on her face and her leg bent wrongly beneath her, my wife of 40 years looked at me with eyes full of grief, and she told me the truth she had been carrying, alone, for 3 years. 3 years. She had found out, entirely by accident, that Daniel and Vivienne had opened a life insurance policy in our names. Not through us, not with our knowledge or consent. Forged signatures. A broker Vivienne knew through her father's business connections. A policy that would pay out a substantial sum, over $300,000, upon our deaths. Margaret had found a document, a single page that had been misdirected, sent to our home address rather than to Daniel's because of an old form that still had our address on it. She had opened it without thinking. It was addressed to the estate of Harold and Margaret Colton. And when she read it, she said the room went cold around her. I didn't tell you, she whispered to me now, there on the rocks, because I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I was wrong. I thought maybe it was something else. Maybe there was an explanation. I told myself you would confront Daniel and he would deny it, and it would destroy what little we had left of him. She paused to catch her breath. Even speaking was painful for her. But then he called about this trip, she said, and something in my chest told me. Harold, something in my chest just knew. Why didn't you tell me? My voice cracked. Margaret, why didn't you? Because you would have looked at him differently, she said, and I kept hoping I was wrong. I kept praying I was wrong. She wasn't wrong. I lay there on that mountain, with the sky above me going gray with afternoon clouds, and I felt something inside me that I cannot fully describe to you. It wasn't rage, not then. It was deeper than rage. It was the specific grief of a man who realizes that the child he devoted his life to had looked at him and seen only a transaction. A number, an obstacle between himself and money. How do we get out of here? I asked. Margaret, despite everything, despite her pain, despite her broken leg, despite the blood on her face, actually almost smiled. I called someone, she said, before the trip, just in case. A beat of silence. Who? I asked. Thomas, she said. Thomas was my brother, lived 2 towns over. The most stubborn, reliable, impossible man I had ever known in my life. And Margaret had called him the night before and told him where we were going, which trail, what time, and she had said, "If you don't hear from me by 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, call the Mountain Rescue Service and give them these exact coordinates." It was now, by my estimation, close to noon. We had 2 hours to wait, so we waited. I held my wife's hand, she held mine. Neither of us spoke for a long time. At 2:17 in the afternoon we heard voices above us. Mountain Rescue, 4 of them, ropes, stretchers, medical kits. They found us within 20 minutes of arriving at the coordinates Margaret had given Thomas. One of the rescuers, a young woman with a calm, professional voice, held my face in her hands and said, "Sir, you're going to be okay. We have you." I wept. I am not ashamed to tell you that. 67 years old, lifelong carpenter, man who never cried at movies, I wept like a child. Because those words, "We have you," were the kindest thing anyone had said to me in what felt like a very long time. Margaret had a fractured leg, 2 broken ribs, a deep laceration on her forehead, and severe bruising. I had a broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and lacerations on my head and shoulder. We were both alive. Alive, they airlifted us to the hospital in the nearest city. And there, in the emergency waiting room, looking pale and stricken and wearing hiking gear that was still clean because he hadn't fallen down any mountainside, was Daniel. He and Vivienne had come to the hospital. They had come to the hospital. Whether they expected to identify bodies or whether they were covering themselves, I do not know. But they were there, and when the doctor came out and said, "The Coltons are both stable. Mr. Colton is asking for family," I saw Daniel's face go through several colors in very quick succession. The nurse led them back to my room. I was lying in the bed with my arm in a cast and my head bandaged and the heart monitor beeping steadily beside me. Margaret was in the next room being treated. Daniel walked in, Vivienne behind him. He opened his mouth. "Dad, we didn't sit down," I said. My voice was very quiet, very level. I had learned something from 40 years of carpentry. The steadier your hands, the cleaner the cut. He sat down. Vivienne remained standing near the door. "I know about the insurance policy," I said. The room went very still. "Margaret told me," I said. "She found the document 3 years ago. She had the policy number, the broker's name, the amount, $312,000, on the deaths of Harold and Margaret Colton." I looked at my son, my boy, my only child, the person I had built bicycles for and saved for and wept over and been so relentlessly proud of. "I just want to know one thing, Daniel, one thing." He didn't speak. "Was there ever a moment, even one, where you thought about stopping?" Silence. Vivienne made a small movement toward the door. "Don't," I said to her without looking at her. "The police are already on their way." Thomas called them from the rescue site. Everything Margaret told him, the policy, the broker, the trail, all of it is already in their hands. Vivienne stopped moving. Daniel put his face in his hands, and I I looked at my son's bowed head, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Pity, not for him, not entirely, but for the boy he used to be, for the child who had closed his eyes over his mother's apple cake and said this is the best thing in the world. For whatever series of choices and influences and moral surrenders had taken that boy and made him into this man who could stand on a mountain path and push his parents off a cliff. That boy was gone, and I mourned him, even then, even in that hospital bed. Margaret told me the rest of it 2 days later, when we were both in recovery. There was more. The insurance policy that was Vivienne's idea, conceived and executed entirely without Daniel's initial knowledge. She had forged both signatures, mine and Margaret's, yes, but also Daniel's as the policy beneficiary. She had involved a broker connected to her father's illegal financial dealings, a man who had since been under investigation by federal authorities for insurance fraud across multiple cases. When Daniel found out, about 8 months before the mountain trip, he hadn't gone to the police. He hadn't told us. He had, and this is the part that took my breath away in a different kind of way. He had confronted Vivienne, threatened to leave her, and she had told him that if he went to the police, she would claim he had orchestrated everything. She had a paper trail arranged to point at him. She had done it with meticulous, cold preparation. Daniel was trapped, or more honestly, he believed he was trapped. And rather than take the hard road, the right road, the road that leads through humiliation and legal trouble and loss and shame, but eventually comes out somewhere clean, he took the easy road. He stayed silent, and then, somewhere in that silence, the unthinkable had seemed thinkable, and then possible. And then, on the 14th of October, done. I don't tell you this to excuse him. There is no excuse. But I tell you because I think it matters. I think it matters deeply that evil rarely arrives in our lives as a stranger. It usually grows in the dark spaces created by small surrenders. By the first lie we decide not to challenge. By the first wrong thing we decide to tolerate because the alternative feels too costly. Daniel's first surrender was not on that mountain. It was the night he found out what his wife had done and chose to say nothing. Vivienne was arrested 4 days after the mountain incident. The charges were extensive: attempted murder, insurance fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Her father's broker was already in federal custody, and when investigators connected the insurance policy to the broader fraud case he was involved in, the evidence against Vivienne became overwhelming. She did not get bail. Daniel cooperated with investigators. He provided everything he knew: dates, conversations, documents he had secretly kept on his phone, messages. He pleaded guilty to charges of criminal negligence and failure to report a crime. He faced a separate civil suit. He went to prison for 3 years. I want to tell you that I felt justice. I want to tell you that when I heard the sentences, Vivienne, 8 years, Daniel, 3, I felt something clean and final. But I felt nothing like that. I sat in a hard wooden chair in a courtroom that smelled like floor polish, and I looked at my son's face as he was led away, and I felt the same thing I'd felt in that hospital room: pity and grief, and the persistent, unreasonable, indestructible love that a parent feels for their child, even when, especially when, there is absolutely no logical reason left to feel it. I am not proud of that love, but I am not ashamed of it either. It simply is the way weather is, the way gravity is. You don't choose it. Margaret and I moved out of the Maplewood Lane house 6 months after the trial. Too many things in those rooms that held shapes of the past. We found a smaller place, a cottage, really, white walls, a front porch, a back garden. Margaret planted roses again, pink ones. It took her longer than it used to with her leg, but she did it herself on her own time, on her own terms. I built a workbench in the back shed and started making furniture again. Small pieces, chairs, side tables. I gave most of them away to neighbors. It was never about selling. It was about having something to do with my hands while the rest of me healed. Thomas, my stubborn, impossible, wonderful brother, came to stay with us for a month that first winter. He slept on the couch and ate everything in the refrigerator and argued with me about football every evening. And in 30 years, I don't think I've ever been more grateful for anything in my life. Margaret and I talked more in those months than we had in years. Real talking, the kind where you say the things you've been carrying too long. She told me about the fear she'd felt for 3 years, knowing what she knew and not knowing what to do. I told her about the things I should have said to Daniel, to both of them. Over all those years of small insults and thin walls and untouched apple cake. We let too much pass. I said one evening, we were trying to keep the peace. She said, there was no peace to keep. I said, we were just keeping quiet. She thought about that for a while. Yes, she said, I think you're right. If I could tell young parents one thing from all of this, just one thing, it would be that silence is not kindness. Accepting disrespect without comment does not preserve relationships. It teaches the wrong lessons to everyone involved. I should have said, the first time Vivienne called our house quaint, this house is not quaint. This house is our home, and in our home, we speak about each other with respect. I should have said it clearly, calmly, without anger, but I said nothing, and silence in the end has a price. 14 months after sentencing, I received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope. The return address was the correctional facility where Daniel was serving his sentence. I held it for a long time before I opened it. I'm not going to read you the whole letter. Some of it is mine. Some of it belongs only to a father and his son. But there is one part I will share with you, because I think it is important. Because I think it is true in a way that transcends my story and reaches into something all of us carry. He wrote, Dad, I know there is nothing I can say that makes this right. I know you know that too. I've spent every night here trying to understand how I became someone capable of what I did. And the only honest answer I can find is this. I stopped seeing you as a person a long time ago. I'm not sure when exactly. Somewhere between Vivienne's money and my own ambition, I started seeing you and Mom as objects from a past I was trying to outrun. And once I stopped seeing you as a person, the rest followed. I don't say this to explain myself. I say it because I think it's the most dangerous thing a human being can do, stop seeing another human being as a person. I should have seen you. I should have looked at you and seen my father, the man who rebuilt a bicycle by hand for 3 weekends so I could have something I would love. I failed you. I failed Mom. I failed myself, and I am sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I am just sorry. I read that letter 6 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of the side table I had made myself, in the cottage with the white walls and Margaret's pink roses. And I sat with it, just sat with it. I am 68 years old now, my arm healed, my ribs healed. The scar on my head has faded to a thin white line that I can only see if I look in a certain light at a certain angle. Margaret walks with a slight limp that may never fully go away. She doesn't complain about it. She says it keeps her honest, reminds her that she is still here, still breathing, still planting roses. I have not answered Daniel's letter yet. I am not sure I'm ready. I may never be ready, or I may wake up one morning and find that I am. I have learned not to force those things. The heart moves at its own speed, and it does not consult you before it decides. But here is what I have decided. Here is what I know. Here is what that mountain, and the fall, and the blood, and Margaret's whispered words in the cold air taught me in the end. Number 1, the people who love you the most will often say the least. Margaret carried a 3-year burden rather than break my heart. That was wrong of her. I wish she had told me, but I also understand it because it came from love. The lesson is not that we should hide our pain from the people we love. The lesson is that the quiet, steady people in your life, the ones who don't demand attention, who don't make dramatic speeches, who just show up year after year, meal after meal, rose after rose, those are the ones whose love is deepest and most real. Don't mistake their quiet for weakness. Don't mistake their patience for ignorance. Number 2, disrespect, tolerated and unchallenged, does not stay small, it grows. Every time Vivienne looked down her nose at our home and Daniel said nothing, something grew in the space that silence created. Not immediately dangerous, but it grew and grew. And over years, what starts as dismissiveness can end in something unrecognizable. Speak up, speak kindly, speak early, but speak. Number 3, money is not worth what it costs. I don't mean that abstractly. I mean, look at what Vivienne sacrificed for $300,000, her freedom, her future. Eventually, I have no doubt her own peace of mind, in whatever cell she occupies. Look at what Daniel sacrificed. His parents, his integrity, his own self-respect, the moment he chose silence over honesty. Money is a tool. It has no soul, and people who mistake it for a goal rather than a tool will spend their entire lives working towards something that cannot love them back. Number 4, it is possible to love someone and not save them. This is the hardest truth I carry. I loved Daniel with everything I had. I gave him everything I had, and he still made the choices he made. Because love, no matter how genuine and how deep, cannot enter another person's soul and make them choose right. We can model it, we can teach it, we can live it in front of them every day, but we cannot do it for them. That is their work, and if they choose not to do it, the grief of that belongs to them, not to us. And number 5, the most important one, survival is not just physical. Margaret and I survived that mountain, but the survival that matters most happened afterward, in the cottage, at the workbench, in the garden with the pink roses. The survival of our kindness, of our willingness to still believe in people, even people who had failed us, to keep the door of our hearts open, not all the way, not recklessly, but open, just a crack, just enough for light to get through. That is the hardest kind of survival, and it is the only kind that matters in the end. Margaret and I went back to Clearwater Mountain last spring, not to the Ridgeback section, never that, but to the lower trail, the easy, gentle path that runs along the river at the mountain's base. We walked slowly, her hand in mine, the way we've walked for 40 years. She stopped at one point and looked up at the mountain peak, just visible through the trees. "Are you okay?" I asked. She thought about it. "I'm okay," she said. "Are you?" I looked up at the mountain, at the place where everything had broken, at the sky above it, wide and blue and indifferent and beautiful. "Getting there," I said. She squeezed my hand. We kept walking. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think of someone you love, or someone you may have been taking for granted, or something you've been carrying in silence for too long, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about real life, real love, and the kind of truth that only comes after the fall, please subscribe. We'll be here every week telling the stories that matter.